As we've been studying the names of Jesus that reveal him to us in many different ways. We see him from different aspects. As a matter of fact, for most of you, when you probably go to a theater, you try to find the perfect seat. You try to find that place to watch the movie from the perfect position. It's the same way when you probably come even to worship this morning, like you find your seat, you have your seat. And I'm kind of figuring out some of you all have a seat where you like to sit and you like to move. It's a perfect seat. But have you ever gone to some place and sat in a different perspective? When you sit in a different seat, it's like you see it from a different angle, and it changes you. And that's what we do when we begin to look at the names of Jesus. We see him at different angles and different positions that we're not used to. And you know what? When you begin to think about descriptions, there's not really one word that describes you. That person, you said, describe that person with one word. You couldn't do it. It wouldn't describe them completely by far. It would be far-reaching to know how they would be described as far as that was concerned. Your spouse or your sibling would describe you one way. Your kids, you guys would describe your mom and dad in another way. A matter of fact, there was a fun thing this weekend. We had some guests with us, and we began talking to them, their kids, about which their kid was more like which parent. And it was just kind of interesting because I'm sure looking at all the kids in here, we ask you, are you like your mom or you like your dad? And you get some of you both. Which are you more like your mom or your dad? Both. All right. I figured kind of by you. Mom? Okay. Good answer. Good answer. Good answer. So, it's good when we get these qualities that we take a look at them, but there's not one thing that describes them. The four Gospels that we have in the Scriptures paint portraits of Christ. And they're really beautiful. They're distinctive. Each author, authored by one, the Spirit itself, but each of the human authors, four of them, have a purpose in showing different aspects. Matthew was a tax collector. Mark was a missionary. John, a fisherman. Luke, a physician. All coming from different perspectives and all writing portraits. And this morning, what we were going to do throughout the morning, we're going to weave in basically looking at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and their portraits in a small section just to see how they reveal to us Jesus. Matthew's an interesting character. We'll be taking a look in Matthew, a lot of different verses as we go throughout this morning. Matthew 28 will be where we'll kind of end, if you want to open your scriptures, because I love being in scriptures. We'll be in scriptures all morning. But the picture of Matthew kind of gives us this painting of royalty of Jesus. It's kind of interesting. Really, as a king, as one who has power and authority, is this, that when you begin reading through Matthew, and what makes it distinctive is that he has this desire for those that read it to understand that he is the one, the king, the Messiah, who has fulfilled all the prophecies. It's written to the Jews. Matthew writes to his fellow Jews. He understood this concept of Roman authority and power because he became wise enough to become one, even as a Jew, who was able to, let me put it this way, keep one foot in the Jewish community, and he took his other foot and put it in the Roman community, and becoming a tax collector, he became a person who not only became, somewhat wealthy, but ended up walking away from this for the sake of Christ. He was a person who understood that how things function and worked in this kingdom that God was entering into. He firsthand saw how Jesus fulfilled prophecies, things that Jesus did, things that Jesus said, things that occurred with Jesus himself. He was witness of that. And when the Spirit in Matthew began to sit down and to write this account, it was important that he communicate to the reader that this is Jesus, the Messiah, the King of the Jews. He starts out, if you look at genealogy. It's interesting because Matthew's genealogy goes all the way back to the line of King David. Because he wanted them to know, and all good Jews would know that Jesus, the Messiah, would come from this lineage. And that would be the first thing that they would look at. Well, he's not even from that line. He's from a different tribe. There's no way he could be this person. And Matthew wanted the reader to know right away that, listen, Jesus is from the line. He is from the line of the king. He himself is this King of kings and Lord of lords. And the Jews would know that. It was from this line that over and over again the Spirit leads Matthew to write things that Jesus did or that were accomplished. And he would say, and this fulfills prophecy. And this fulfills prophecy. And this fulfills prophecy. It was a reminder to the reader that, wait a minute. How is this possible that this was spoken thousands of years ago by the prophets? And now Jesus is literally accomplishing them. He's making the blind to see, which was prophecy. He was doing things that were like only could it be accomplished if it was the Messiah himself. Matthew wanted to open the eyes of the Jewish community that Jesus was the one. He was the one that God sent. And all he would teach, even when Jesus taught, it was different than anybody else. I can imagine sitting and listening to Jesus teach, how mesmerizing it was, but it was something very different about his countenance as far as that was concerned. As a matter of fact, when Jesus would teach, it just wasn't how he taught, it was one that he began to say he was taught as one with authority, different than all the others. There was something different about Jesus' teaching, not just the uses of parables, not just the uses of phrases or the way he explained truths, the spiritual truths in such an easy way to understand, but it was the fact that he did it as one setting up a kingdom. He talked a lot about, Matthew writes and uses a lot of the phrase of Jesus speaking, using the kingdom of heaven being near. Jesus wanted them to know the kingdom of heaven is near, and you need to turn to it, to repent to it. He would tell stories that would describe the kingdom as a farmer who would take seeds and throw it out, and then his enemies would come and they would plant weeds, and then the farmer would have to go out and separate those. He would tell stories of the mustard seed, so small, because if you have a faith so small like a mustard seed, he begins to explain the mustard seed, how it so small would grow to be so large. And he goes, that is the kingdom of heaven. It was beauty in that description that Jesus would use. He said that the kingdom of heaven in his teachings in Matthew is like a hidden treasure. It's probably one of my favorite stories that Jesus talks about. The value is so great that when the man who found this treasure went home and he sold everything. I mean, he sold everything that was in his house, everything he belonged, everything in his closet. He sold everything in order that he could buy the property in order to go get the treasure. He said, the kingdom of heaven is so valuable that it's something that you would lay down everything else for to obtain this beautiful thing with God. And it's incredible. All the way to the very end of the book of Matthew, we still see this idea of the royalty of Christ. We know the Great Commission. For those that have been in the church for a while, you may be familiar with this commission that Jesus left to the disciples and to the church and to all that were part of his kingdom. And it was this commission, and a lot of us would know it in Matthew 28. It actually begins in verse 18, but most of us quote it. If you know it, you usually start at verse 19, which says, therefore go into all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and surely I'm with you always. That's what we think of, right? But the commission actually begins in 18. And it begins with this phrase, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given me. The commission itself is attached to the person and to the King Christ. Who gives a commission but a king, right? We call it a commission. Only a king commissions, only one in authority commissions. And so we have this incredible image of Jesus as king, as one who has all authority on heaven and earth, the one that has the say, the one who reigns over all, the one who is amazing in his royalty and his power. This is King Jesus. And Matthew wanted us to know, Jesus wants us to know of this great authority that he has and has commissioned us to go is connected to that. Many times we want to go. We'll go and do many things, but too many times we forget it's always in relationship to the King. It's always in relationship to Jesus himself. So how do I respond to King Jesus? That's a good question I think we need to answer ourselves today. How do you, in faith, respond to Jesus? Because a part of the commission is to obey everything I told you to do. That's not easy for us to do. I obey some of them. I flip a coin whether I want to do that one today. We kind of pick and choose as far as that's concerned. But this is the King who's in relationship with us. This is the King who says, will you be obedient to me? We can choose to be like Israel, who thought in their relationship with God could give lip service. We could go through the motions of believing. We can go through the motions of religion. We can go through the motions of being people who go to church. But really my heart, my mind, and my soul, it's just a kind of a lip service. I can do Christian things, but it doesn't mean I am submissive really to the King himself. And God knew that lip service. Israel didn't hide it. I can't hide it. We can't hide that. So rather, we want to have this heart of submission, this heart of surrender, and not to have a stubborn heart. And it's hard for us because we're stubborn. I mean, really, I've got my stubborn streak in me. No, this is how I want to do it. This is how we should do it. And it begins at a young age. We become stubborn. There's nothing like fighting over food. I don't know, maybe in your house you don't fight over food, but I find for some reason kids growing up and eating certain foods is like war. Is it not? All those parents involved, heads shake, yes. Is it battle? Is it? Yes, everybody's in agreement. There's a amen and a hallelujah out there as well. No, I'm kidding. But just this sense that why is eating food a battleground? Why is this? And we as parents dig in, kids dig in. I'm not going to eat that. You can't make me eat that. I used to sit at my table. Do your parents make you eat liver? They don't even know what liver is. Now I'm getting a thumbs up from Tom back here. Liver, yeah. Oh, no. Worst day, I'd come home from school. I could smell it before I even got in the house. Mom was cooking liver. Cannot stand it. I said we would never have liver in our house, and she's kept to that. We've not done it. I would sit there, and hours. I could not leave the table until I ate my liver. And it looks gross, smells gross, tastes gross. I don't care what Tom says back there. It's total disagreement. And it's just this, I couldn't do it. I would pour Thousand Island dressing on it. I would pour ketchup on it. I would cover it in anything possible. I'm sorry, God just didn't make my taste buds to like it. I'm glad he made yours, Tom, that way. But what I'm saying is this stubbornness, not to go on and on about it, but this sense of this, how stubborn am I with God? Really? Where do I draw lines? Where do I say, God, I will go this far with you, but no farther. I will trust you to this limit, but I don't know if I'm going to trust you any farther. Because I have to keep this in control. And it's this incredible truth of who Christ is, this King, worthy of our praise, worthy of our submission, worthy of our surrender. Philippians, Paul writes to the Philippians, and I like to read this together. It's going to come up on the screen. Philippians, we see out of chapter 2. And I'd like to just simply read this together. Matter of fact, let's stand out of respect to our King as we would, and respect to the Word of God. Let's stand and read this text together out of Philippians 2. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And all his people said, amen. Mark, written by the missionary Mark, actually historically it was written first out of all the four Gospels, if you put them in line. They're not in our text, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in chronological order. Actually, Mark is the oldest and the earliest written. And Matthew and Luke probably used some of that, and they're just plotting out even their own is what they wrote, is the possibility. And it gives a very different picture than Matthew. This royal picture that Matthew gave, you have something very, very different. As a matter of fact, what you have is not that Jesus per se takes off the royal robe. It's just that which Mark portrays, he does something in that royal robe, and that's he becomes low. He becomes a servant. He paints this picture of Jesus that is common amongst man. He is a man who is engaged in serving mankind. It's a gospel that takes action. It's written actually to Romans, is who Mark was writing to. And in that, Romans were people of action, just like we here are in America. We want to do things. And if you look at Mark, it's written very simply. It's really straight to the point. And in Mark's gospel, when you begin looking at it and perusing through it, you begin seeing that it's just action after action after action. The word immediately is used many times, that Jesus immediately did this or immediately did that. It's a sense of he was a man of action. He was a man engaged in humanity and community. He saw needs. And he had a sense to meet them and to accomplish them. But he didn't leave the robe, and he didn't leave this power of deity either, because Mark wanted to show how he used his power and the miracles that he did constantly throughout this book of Mark. The miracles of calming the storm, of healing the demon-possessed, that Jesus did that, the raising of the dead, the healing of the sick, the feeding of the 5,000, the walking on the water. All those things were all about rescue. They were all about Jesus coming to redeem and to serve. It was all about Jesus taking someone that wasn't healthy and bringing them to health, serving them in some way, to even washing the feet of the disciples in Mark chapter 10. You see, because the religious leaders of that day were people who were proud of their position, proud of their title, proud of their authority. And when they interacted with people, they always found themselves as better than others, always better than the common person, always in a position to be seated at the proper place at the table, not at the foot, but at the head, because they were to be honored people and guests in homes. And they walked the streets that way. And then people themselves would kind of back away. Who could ever be like those? They had memorized so much of the scriptures of the Old Testament. They wore the phylacteries. They were men that would be set apart in so many ways, but they created such a gap. And they began to realize that the disciples thought, well, is that what leadership is? And Jesus said, no, not the kind of leadership my disciples will have. My disciples won't lord it over people. My disciples won't be people who press down and keep their thought. My disciples, the ones who know me and walk with me, they walk differently. They walk as servants. He goes, if you want to be first, then you need to be last. If you want to accomplish something and you gain the world, then you lose your life. That's how you gain as far as Jesus was concerned. This laying down of life. And in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, we see this, that Jesus speaks. He says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Interesting Jesus perspective there. I didn't leave the heavenly realms to come and for you to set at my feet. There will be a time when all that occurs. We see that in the book of Revelation. But now Jesus says, no, I haven't come that you would serve me, though I deserve that being served. I don't come for you to lift me up and praise and worship me at this time, because that will come. But now I've come with the purpose of serving. I've come actually for the purpose of laying my life down as a ransom. Jesus is kind of saying that a servant's heart is something that is costly. And it's costly to be his disciple. Jesus was very upfront with that very beginning. When his disciples knew that they walked away from their businesses. Matthew himself walked away from tax collecting. You had people walking away from their fishing business, everything in order to follow Jesus. And what did they gain? They gained the gospel, the responsibility to take it to the world. They gained salvation. They gained walking with God himself. They gained this, and they began to understand that to do this, though, was not to raise themselves into positions, but rather that they would suffer, that they would pay the cost. It wasn't a servant's attitude that I will do a little bit and then to check off the list that I have served. It was the mentality of the heart. It wasn't a service out of convenience. It was literally a heart that Jesus says it is one that is consistent. I want that kind of heart. I want that heart. And I think one of the marks of discipleship, and I don't know if you do a yearly evaluation. A lot of people look at January and go, but just a yearly evaluation of how am I growing as a disciple? Am I a different disciple today than I was a year ago? Am I still wrestling with the same things? When God gives me an opportunity to serve, do I respond to it the same way I did when I was first a Christian? Or now, how do I respond to this servanthood thing? Am I growing in this area of surrender and serving one another? Is it something we can see in the home? Would our spouses or say that we serve them? What our neighbors say, we serve them, that we engage in our community, in the neighborhood right around us, that we are actually engaged in our neighbors and they need help. You're going to be the first one to help and be there for them. If they're sick, you're the first one to bring them food. It's this service. Is that a part of my nature and my character and who God is making me to be? Am I willing to give up certain things in order that other people can gain certain things? And I think it's important that we think about even raising our children. I mean, the kids aren't here, but, I remember as a parent, if I could just get them to obey me, man, it'd just be great. I mean, that's just the goal. Just do what I tell you to do, and it'd be fantastic. But the reality is that there's deeper than just obedience because I told you so. And as parents, we're really after that. We're after the deeper. What we're after is a child who doesn't have to be told what to do because they see it and they do it, right? Isn't that the ultimate goal in our kids? That they just simply acknowledge it, see it, do it, and then we go, they got it. Now they have it. Because now that I don't have to push and prod, they see that there's a need. Oh, that garbage is full. Wouldn't it be great if I know it'd be great if your kids say, oh, the garbage is full, I'll take that out. That'd be, whoa, that'd be incredible moments. You'd be like, we're going out to eat tonight. Anyway, but what I'm saying, it's this moment of understanding that it's a part of us. And I think that's valuable for all of us to say, God, I want to grow to be your servant. I want to grow and be open my eyes to what's around me. When I go back to that Mark 10 passage, it reminds me of something else. Because as he not only came to be served, but to give his life as a ransom for many. And it dawned on me that Jesus' act of service moved us to God. It wasn't just the basic, I'm doing something to help somebody. It was an act that moved me from where I was, distant from God, separate from God, unable to approach God because I have my sinful nature. I can't approach God. He's a holy God. But what Jesus did in his act of service, leaving the heavenly realms, coming and dying on the cross for me, his act of serving moves me closer into a relationship with God. And there's something beautiful about that idea that serving brings people closer to God. It brings God in the presence, and it brings us to them. It is this taking that which is broken. Christ's service takes that which is broken, and he puts it back together. And when we come in communion, we're reminded of that. We're reminded of this healing that God is capable of doing, that no one else can do. When we think of the bread, it's interesting that we think of something that's been broken to heal. Isn't that in itself an interesting message? That something has been broken in order to heal us. But that's what Jesus did. About 12 years, longer than that, 12, 15 years ago, there was a couple I knew at the Dan Jones campus who were struggling in their marriage, like others who struggle in their marriage. It's married. When you say you're married, there's struggles. It was difficult. It had been difficult for years. Nothing as far as infidelity is concerned, but just difficult. And they divorced. But this was it was different. And not so much different in the divorce. It was painful. There was separation. They had 2 daughters. And yet, in the midst of the years that follow, the husband and wife still were very cordial to each other, very much a part of their girls' lives, but yet divorced. A lot of pain. A lot of difficulty. And through the years, through their interactions, through their ups and downs, through the husband's struggle, through the wife's struggle, in the midst of about a 8 to 10 year period of time, all of a sudden I noticed, because they continued to worship. This was what was so beautiful to some degree. They continued to come and worship. And that was not easy for them, believe me. But they came to worship. And they would sit differently. And all of a sudden I realized they were sitting closer to each other one Sunday. I kind of cocked my head a little bit, And the following Sunday, they were sitting next to each other. And all of a sudden I saw them just interacting and talking. And I saw them engaging. I saw the girls. The girls were smiling. The girls were now teenagers. They're no longer young anymore. They were teenagers. And all of a sudden, in their life, in their journey, all of a sudden I'm going, where's this heading? And I was just like, is this like really like cool God stuff that's happening here? And I talk with her, talk with him. And lo and behold, God in healing their hearts and their lives, they began to entrust each other again. And I had the privilege of doing their ceremony and bringing them together with their daughters on their left and right side. Only God does that. And the journey of bringing back together, which this world says it's done, it's over, it's broken, nobody can put it back together. I'm telling you today, as we come in the communion, I don't care what you're facing, we have a God who puts things back together. That's why he came to serve and to restore. And that's what our God does. Philippians 2, the first part of the verse that I read to you a while ago, talks about having the same heart of Christ, the same mindset of Christ. And he goes on in verse 6 of Philippians, who says this, Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. Let us remember, as you partake of communion today, let's remember, let's be grateful of that which God has put back together already in our lives, but also to lay before him what still needs to get put back together in our lives. Luke was an educated man, physician, who went about his writing of his gospel through the inspiration of the Spirit in a very matter of fact and historical perspective. As a matter of fact, when you read Luke, it reads very differently. He makes sure and mentions more about the humanity of Christ than anything. He wants us to understand that he was a man, he was the Son of God that was amongst men. He was God with us in the flesh. And it was important for Luke when he wrote it. I mean, he would write the historical who was in a position of authority in the Roman Empire. Who he led all these simple things. You could look at the Christmas story. When we read the Christmas story, it's all set in Quirinius, and this was done and this was done. And it's the way that Luke thought. It's the way that Luke processed it. And it's beautiful because it's a sense of the fact that Luke wanted us to know that Luke wanted us to know that this Theophilus, he was writing to a friend, Theophilus, who was a Greek. Matter of fact, it's written to the Greek and Greek thinking per se. But he wanted us to understand really the identity and the humanness of Christ himself. Luke also has a genealogy. It's not the first thing he goes to. It's later on in the book of Luke that we see he places it in there. And it's interesting that Luke's genealogy doesn't stop at David, because his lineage wants to attach all the way back to Adam. And if you go and look at that in the book of Luke, you will see it goes all the way to with Adam himself. What he wants to identify is who is the first man? Adam. And he wanted the reader, and for us, and God wanted us to see this in Luke and to understand that he attaches to us, that Jesus, we know, was tempted in every way as we were, but yet did not fall into temptation. We see that religious folks, as a matter of fact, in the book of Luke, over and over again, paints this picture of what people thought of Jesus, especially the religious people. Of course, the religious folks did not like Jesus well. As a matter of fact, they accused him over and over again of being a friend to sinners. Jesus was always in their house. He was always going to where they were. He was always engaged in those that the religious folks, don't go there, don't be. And yet Jesus was right in the midst of the people that hurt, people that needed, people that he loved, and he loved dearly, and he wanted to be with them, and yet he was accused of different things, and he would respond to them very confidently. He says, what does the doctor do? The doctor does not come for those that are well. The doctor comes for those that are sick. And it's the image, the portrait of Christ that we want to see. This is Jesus who identifies with me in pain. This is the Jesus that Luke reveals to us that identifies with me in struggle and difficulty and conflict. If there was anybody that knew conflict, it was Jesus. Jesus was loved and hated. And he understood that push that we often feel in our own life. And yet he knew that he was here to restore, again, this brokenness. Luke chapter 15 is this beautiful description of story after story that Jesus talks about the lost being found. He talks about the lost son, which is the prodigal son, or the parable really should be called of the two sons. One who runs away and wastes everything, and the other one who stays put and does everything he's supposed to. Both of them have their issues with dad. And dad is all about restoring both of them back to himself. He talks about the rejoicing of the lost pearl. He talks about the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin. It goes on and on. This lostness, but there's a mourning and grieving over the loss, and there's a celebrating over the return. There's joy over the return, and it's seen even in the stories chosen. Luke enters in here just as at the end in Luke chapter 19. We see this great story. If you grew up in the church, you know the story of Zacchaeus. If you didn't, it's just this great, cool story about another tax collector. Because see, Zacchaeus, this man, was rejected basically by the Jews because he had sided, as a tax collector, he sided with Rome. But Zacchaeus was a man driven to see Jesus. Now, initially, when you read that text in Luke 19, it is this desire really to see him. He wanted to see what he looked like. He had heard the teaching, he heard the buzz around town for over 3 years of Jesus who had done miracles. I wanted to see him, and that's what Zacchaeus said. So he moved ahead of him, climbs up a tree. Whether the crowd's so large, some say he's like short, so he couldn't see over people. We don't really know how tall Zacchaeus. I know that blows the song. Wee little man was he, and but you don't. There's no really. Luke doesn't measure him, let me put it that way. What we know is he does anything he wants to see him, but what's incredible is, out of all the people that were there, all the people wanting to see Jesus, all those that were involved and around him as he was entering into the city, Jesus notices probably one of the most outcast men that was in the crowd. And he stops and he looks at him and goes, I love this phrase, I must come to your home today. And it's interesting because you read what's next is the crowd and everybody around him. Look, hey, he's going to a sinner's house for lunch. After church, that's where he's going. And Jesus ignores him. And what you have now is this encounter of Zacchaeus with Christ. And Zacchaeus is overwhelmed by his presence, by who he is, and all of a sudden he responds in a way. He stands up and says, look, here and now, Luke verses 9 and 10, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount. Interesting thing is, everybody assumed they all got cheated by the tax collector, the same way. So Zacchaeus is saying, I will right the wrong. I will restore that which has been done against somebody. I will make it right, and I will go beyond making it right. And Jesus gives this response to him. Today, salvation has come to this house, because this man too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. That's the portrait of Christ. He came to seek and to save the lost. It's what drove him. It's what kept him. It's what kept him to the cross. It's what kept him in this task of restoring us. It's what kept him unwavering. And I'll be honest with you, coming even into this morning, I had some different thoughts on this, but I got a phone call Friday that I've never gotten before. Sorry. I do cry. If you've not known that yet, you'll know now. This will be first of many. Because this is a phone call none of us ever want to get. And it's not with my family even. But it was a phone call from a guy in our life group I used to lead. And he goes, Tim, our family needs your prayers. He goes, my brother just called. His brother lives in Richmond, Indiana. So my brother just called. His oldest daughter, who is 16, and his wife went to Cancun for fall break. Friday morning, they were packed up, waiting for the shuttle to come to take it to the airport to return back. The 17-year-old says, can I have the cell phone? I'm going to go out and I'm going to take a picture of the pool one more time and the beach. She never returned. She never returned. He was calling me at 1:30 in the afternoon. Tim, it's been 4 hours. They don't know where she's at. They cannot find her. His brother is here with the other 3 kids. I have 2 daughters. As you try to go, right now you're trying to go there. You do not want to go there. And I began to think, what would I do? What do I do as a dad? Steve jumped on a plane yesterday and headed to Cancun. But I'm thinking, how do you leave? How do you leave Cancun? How do you ever leave Cancun, knowing that when you leave, you're possibly leaving your daughter there forever? How do you know that maybe around the corner? How would you never stop pursuing to get your daughter back? Where would be the line? How long would you stay? What would you spend in order to get your daughter back? What would you do to get that? And you just sat there, and the pain is like, there's no way I could get on a plane knowing that my daughter may be forever on this place. And it hit me. Is that not what God has done? Is not that God to seek and save the lost? Is not that his heart is driven as a parent that goes, my child, they're lost, and I will do anything, and I will pay any cost, and I will not leave you until I bring you back to me, until I restore you back to me. I will not stop. I will not end, and I will pay the ultimate cost, if that's what it's going to take, to find you and to pursue you and to bring you back to me. And that's exactly what he did. Now I got some great news to you, because at 8:30 last night, I got a text, they found her. And I did a little dance. And my heart was good. You didn't see the dance. I was downstairs. So anyway, I thought, the text simply said, she's at the police station. They found her. Mom and dad are both there. I don't know the story. I don't know history. I have no clue. But what I am grateful for is that the lost is found. And what I'm grateful for is that when we come to our hearts and our souls, that Jesus has said, I love you so much, I will pay everything to get you back to me. So what's my heart? Is my heart for the lost around me who do not know Jesus Christ, who do not know the saving grace? Do I have that same burning angst in my heart to go, what will I do? What can I do to influence them? What can I do to share Christ with them? Because without Christ, it's the same situation. And I want not just Jesus to be the one who seeks to pursue, but he's called his church to be the ones who go out and be the ministry of reconciliation. He's called us to be his hands and feet. He's called us to be the ones who have a heart and a passion to go, listen, I'll lay it down. I'll pay the cost. What is it? But in order that you may know Jesus. So what I'd like to do is just spend the next few moments in just prayer. Just quiet, personal prayer. Because God's got people in your life who need Jesus. And I just simply encourage you to just take the next few minutes, quiet personal time, and just go, Father, who do I need to share? Give me the faith to share. Give me the words to share the truth of Jesus. And ask that God would open their heart to use you, to use other people, in order that they may come to know the saving grace of Christ. Let's spend the next few moments in prayer.
Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them?
God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me, from generation to generation. Then Jesus declared,
I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty.
I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life.
Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved.
I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep.
I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though he dies.
I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him, and have seen him.
I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit.
This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. I am who I am.
It's a great text, first starting with Genesis. Moses' question to then Jesus in fulfillment of using that statement, I am the vine, I am the good shepherd. And we see in the book of John, all those I am statements, we find them in John. It's because John had he had a bottom line. John's written gospel was that you would not miss, in the midst of him being king, in the midst of his humanity, in the midst of his servant, you would not miss that he was God. Because if you captured those other things but forget that Jesus was fully God, then we've missed everything. And John goes, you can't miss that. And God wanted us through that gospel to see it and understand it. As a matter of fact, in John chapter 20, towards the end of it, verses 30 through 31, we read this. That John writes, Jesus performed many other signs in his presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. He was more than a king. He was more than a servant. He was more than a simple man. He was more than some would say a prophet who God spoke through. He was more than anything that we could think of. But he was himself the Lord of all, the Lord God. He was God in flesh. He walked amongst us. And even the disciples struggled with this. Even Philip at one point, and one of his disciples said, Jesus, you're the Son of God, and show us the Father. Show us what he looks like. Show us what he is. And John records this comment, and Jesus' response is this. He goes, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I've been among you for such a long time, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing this work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the work themselves. John himself had seen all of that which Jesus had done. How could this anybody but be God in flesh? Who else could walk on water? Who else could calm storms? Who else could do these things? John wanted us to know that when we walk with Christ, we walk with God himself, restored back to that which occurred in the garden itself. As a matter of fact, that's why John begins in John chapter 1. The beauty of John chapter 1. And it simply states this. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made, and in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And the disciples, they walked, they talked, they laughed, they ate, they cried, they even fought in the presence of God. I often think about that. I'm greater, you're greater. The discussions that they had, right in the presence of God. And it's just the sense that there were moments when they experienced these miracles, they experienced his deity, when they got a glimpse of it, even on the Mount of Transfiguration, they would bow, they would hide, and even when they calmed the storms, they were fearful of him, and they wanted to run away. And I'm sure at some points they wanted to run away because the power and the presence of God was overwhelming, and yet they could not pull themselves away. Because in the same moment as the deity of Christ was revealed, they were drawn to him. They were in awe. They were left in awe. I don't want to lose that awe of Christ. It's Jesus. He's God. He's with us. He is among us. And I want to live as one in awe. I want to live in the one of the blessings of salvation. I want my eyes to open to see Jesus working in my life. I want to know that Jesus is engaged in my life, and I want to be engaged with Christ. I want to be involved with what he wants me to be involved with and being effective in this world. But it begins with us realizing that the great I am is the one who shepherds us, who leads us, who guides us. Let us be people who do not grow weary of our shepherd. Let us be people who grow in love with the one who loves us. Let's just stand this morning and just close our time and just singing and worshiping, lifting our hearts and our eyes, and just simply saying, God, here we are. Let's stand and worship him as we close the end of the service this morning.